Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Delegate Corner. I'm your host, Sinkas, and today we'll be chatting with Bricia Guzman, who is a project manager at General Magic and the co founder of Ethereum Mexico. Bricia shared her experience with retroactive public goods funding, which is what brought her to Optimism, her journey as a delegate, and her views on governance. Let's dive into it. Hello, Bricia, and welcome to Delegate Corner. It's great to have you. And before we dive into the depths of delegate questions, I'd love to start by first getting to know you and your background. So whenever you feel like it, just kick it off.
Okay, so first, thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate this opportunity because as a new delegate, like this is huge, you know? And basically, I'm Mexican. I'm co-founder of Ethereum Mexico. I work as project manager at General Magic, and I'm mother. Like that's what start everything in my Web3 path.
Awesome. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your Web3 journey and how you got into crypto and subsequently into optimism and governance?
Yeah, so in 2021, my child born, and I used to work for restaurant business. I worked in the restaurant industry for almost 8, 9 years. And when my son born, I discovered that that was not the kind of environment that I desired for me and my family. So I stopped working. And when I was an employee, bring a dinner, a friend asked me about what was my dream job, and I say something related to finances because I like in the university, and that gives me the opportunity to have a good quality of life, like work, and after in the afternoon, I spend time with my family without being worried of how I will pay the bills. So he started teaching me about meme coins and NFTs, but that is really hard if someone start teaching you about meme coins in the beginning. So I start from the base, like I start learning about Bitcoin, about Ethereum, and I felt passion when I discovered the relationship with human rights. So after that, like I got full Web3.
Mhm. Awesome. That's interesting to hear. And what brought you to optimism specifically?
I discovered Optimism after RetroPGF2. Ethereum Mexico received funding from RetroPGF2, and that was really important for us because before that we was really worried about how we will survive. Like how we will do our activities. We don't have money. Like education communities sometimes are not like the best business model. When you want to that is free and open. So after RetroPGF2, we start discussing what we will do with that funding. And one of the discussion was around that we want to participate actively in governance, and we want to know who can be the delegate. So we was like in these conversations, I decided to go for my side, not representing Ethereum Mexico, and I felt immediately connect with optimism because this idea of impact equal benefit for me is really disruptive. And as a Latin American, I would love to see that in real life too.
Mhm.
So basically that, like I didn't understand the differences between layer twos before. And after when I discovered RPGF was like, okay, what is this? And I went full to optimism. I think when I find something that I like, I get super passionate and I can eat, drink, and breathe that thing. So that is happening with Optimus right now.
Awesome. I love to see retro PGF act as an incentive because a lot of people have it in their mind as just being a way to reward people for their contributions. But to me, it also seems to be acting as an incentive that people, see that their other people contributions are recognized and it incentivizes them to also contribute. So I love to see that. And making a parenthesis, I think you'd love to be on Michael's podcast where he talks about retro PGF and the effect that it had on community. So I think you'd be a perfect guest for that podcast as well.
Yeah, actually, I want to mention about RetroPGF before we pass to the next like questions or steps. Like after RetroPGF, we start planning Ethereum Mexico 2023. it will happen in October 21st. It will be a reality thanks to Retrofugida. Like we will have our celebration this year in Mexico. Now, like we are doing all the publicity stuff and but without Retrofugida, like we will have hard times for Ethereum
Awesome.
Mexico. So we are really happy and grateful.
Love to hear that. Love to hear that. Absolutely. And you mentioned that you represent yourself as a delegate and not Ethereum Mexico. But I'm curious to know what actually um, brought you to become a delegate. Like, what was the motivation behind that decision to actively participate in governance through becoming a delegate?
Like maybe I don't have so much experience in governance of DAOs, but in 2017, I participated in not a political party, was more an initiative to have independent candidates for political positions. So this part of independent and, like without, I don't know, this idea of it's easier to be apolitical. It's really easy to say, it's like, politics sucks, I won't participate. But you leave the path to other people to take decisions from you. And I think for me, the reason why I decided to be delegate was because for me, representation matters. And was like, before, when I started being a delegate, I didn't knew any other Mexican delegate in any protocol. Like I don't know anyone in not in ENS, Gitcoin. I don't know anyone. So I was like, okay, let's start. Maybe I can be an example of that people without experience on governance and without a technical background can participate in governance, and can put nice inputs to the collective. So basically that's the reason.
Yeah, I think it's very important to have a fresh set of eyes in governance. I don't think it's just for people with technical background or people who are already too deep into crypto, but I think it's also uh, should be open for people that don't have a technical background, that are new to the space. They bring a fresh set of eyes, new ideas, new questions, and that leads me to the next question. So, being a solo delegate and being new to governance, but also in crypto in general, in a sense, what was the hardest thing, and what is the hardest thing as a delegate? What is the most challenging thing that you face? Is it in terms of communication or tooling? What would you say has been a challenge?
I think for me in general has been a lonely experience. I have to learn by myself. Like there is not an actual community like environment, I'm more of like in the communities where I am, it's like everyone shares opportunities and everyone helps the other. And you want to enter to work there, hey, let's do this and I can be with you during this process. And here is more like, okay, I don't know anything. I have to read and I have to attend the calls, but I think I would love to have a more community. Like for example, I would love to study, for example, law of chains with someone that has a different background than mine, so I can learn from them. Like a circle of study with this like long technical articles. I think I would love to have something like that, and I think for me is the hardest part.
Hmm. Yeah, I also share that challenge. When I first started participating in governance, there's too much information, but not much of a circle of people or small tight knit community that you can refer to for help. I think most delegates are open if you message them, and I think Michael also raised that in a previous episode that if you message a delegate and ask them a question or need help with something, they are chances are they're happy to respond and help you. But I think that's not clearly communicated to new members, so they tend to be hesitant. But definitely agree that communication could be a bit better on that end. And so far, as you have been participating in governance, what do you think are some good practices to have as a delegate, especially in terms of communicating your decisions with people?
I think I have been taking examples of delegates that I admire. So I think the communication thread is really important. The disclosure of conflict of interest is really important. In general, like transparency is really important, like be able to over communicate so you don't have any issues in the future.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that are my two special notes.
Yeah, I think again we talked about that with Michael too, and I think most delegates would concur on the same position that being transparent is really important in terms of how you vote, how you make your decisions, and it's also important to be proactive about communicating and being transparent. So really good that I love to see that new delegates also have that idea and they kind of like follow the norm on that front. And speaking of making decisions, how do you make decisions when it comes to voting? Do you have a framework? Is that something that a way that you try to assess what you're voting on, or how do you generally approach that?
Like in general, if you read my communication thread, like I explain a little bit of my experience taking decisions, and I say at the beginning, like, okay, maybe this won't be the best way to take decisions, but for now, it's what I have. In the future, I will improve this way. What I'm doing now is like putting attention in the experienced delegate, the delegates with more experience. For example, I read what Lefteris put, what Linda write, what Paulinia says, so I try to get different kind of perspectives and I take some from them. And also for missions this season, what I did was I checked the rubrics for Grants Council and I took the common categories for builders and grow grant and like take my decision with a spreadsheet. So yeah, I'm experimenting, like I take what I think can be useful and I I take decision with basing on that.
Mhm. Taking ideas from the grants, I love it. Very, very clever. Especially.
Yeah, they are great. Like
Mhm.
I discovered that I didn't have experience in the Grants Council in the past seasons, but with the comments in their proposal for to be Grant Council again, you can see that there is a lot of support from the side of the other delegates. So I was like, they did great. That's why they are supporting again, and they have experience, so it's a good model to take.
Mhm. Awesome. And taking a step back, where do you see the state of optimism governance as it is? Where do you think we are strong? Where do you think we are lacking? What are some areas we could not improve necessarily, but experiment more with?
For me, it's like in a really experimental phase. It's like a crazy scientific, like experiment. And I think that it's good and has some point of opportunities, but it's good because, you can learn from your mistakes and evolve. And that is incredible. Sometimes it's not really easy to standardize because next season will be maybe something completely different and it can be and it's okay. So I think that can work for both sides. But I really like it. And more because Justine is a rock star and she did a great like research and about governance in other DAOs. So I think we have a good like background creating this experiment.
Mhm. Yeah, I too agree that Foundation is doing some wonderful things in terms of steering the direction of governance. Although some people would say that, you know, it's a double-edged sword, right? On the one hand, you have a good steer towards good governance, basically. But on the other hand, since it's coming from the foundation or some key players, it tends to be not as decentralized as it could be. Though it's something that, as you mentioned, is experimenting and it's an iterative process that changes as time goes on. So yeah, I
Yeah,
totally
and
agree.
I think it's getting more decentralized. Like every season, there is more chances to get more decentralized and more decentralized. And I like that is a process, Like I think a project of this magnitude could be really complicated to start it from zero. like super decentralized, you know? Like I think the way that we're doing the things is the right way.
Yeah, 100% share your view. And speaking of, decentralizing and projects or, programs being run within the Optimism Collective, what do you think are some of the best or the most successful programs that we have run in the community? Being, Retro PGF, mission proposals in season 4, builders grants. What do you think is the most successful one? Or not necessarily the most successful, but what do you think has been a success?
I think my favorite one, and of course it's Retro PGF. Like Retro PGF, it's something different. I didn't see that this model in other like organizations, and I think it's really disruptive, you know, like this idea behind it of like it's easier to know the impact that someone can cause after they cause the impact than discover the impact that will cause in the future. I think this idea is really like logic, you know, and I love retro PGF. I personally, as the founder of Ethereum Mexico, I saw what can do for communities, what can do for different teams. So
hmm Yeah,
I will
I
select
would
that one.
assume that was your favorite as well. But
Yeah.
speaking of RPGF, and since it's something that you enjoy and something that really helped you and Ethereum Mexico, as you mentioned with the event coming up, what do you think it could be better, and how do you think it could be improved?
I think of what I've been reading about last retro PGF, like I think the voting or how the badge holders define the value of the teams or the value of the impact that they had is kind of subjective, and sometimes I think like we need to standardize a little bit better because maybe there is projects. I think Michael talked about it, like there is sometimes that teams produce a lot of impact but they didn't communicate a lot, and there is other teams that maybe didn't produce a lot of impact but they are really good with marketing and you can see the results everywhere, and you know, like they are popular. And I think I would like to see a less subjective way to vote the things. I would like to see more transparency. I would like to see what the badge holders vote, and maybe a more decentralized process to have badge holders. I think that can be interesting. But they are working on that, and that is the interesting thing about the experimentation. I saw they have an RFP about a dashboard for badge holders and a voting system for badge holders. So I think that will fix for next round.
Yeah, really interesting input. I do understand what you're saying, and I think that's also an issue in traditional, like the real world, as we like to put it in crypto, where some companies might be more prominent through advertising and marketing, but not providing as much value as others that are providing value but are not good at marketing and communicating that value. Definitely hear you on that front, and yeah, more standardized approach and less objectivity would be a good thing, I believe, as especially as we get more towards decentralization of the entire DAO collective. Speaking of decentralization, you mentioned earlier that as time goes on, it's a process, right? Decentralization doesn't become come in one day. And what do you see the OP DAO from let's say a year or 2 years from now?
I think I would like to see it like fully decentralized. I would like to see as an example for other DAOs, you know, like in the same way that Justin this time analyzed ENS or Gitcoin to take some decisions about our path. I would like to see that they research about Optimism because Optimism did something really good and you know it's a role model. I would like to see that. And I would like to see, to be honest with you, I have a crazy idea. Like for me, this thing about retro PGF, the way to 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 imagine it in the real world or in the non-filter world, it's like what could happen if the fees that we pay for using the credit card machine like goes to public goods. Like in the real world, that could be crazy. So I would like to imagine like Optimism impacting the non-virtual world. I would like to see that.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm fully with you, and I think it's not as as much. It's not really a dream, but rather something that we need to work towards. I definitely would like to see something similar, especially either funding public goods or funding retro PGF through, as you mentioned, like credit card fees. That would be insane to see. But yeah, I did hear you on like having real world application and effects, basically. Definitely agree with you on that end. And
Yeah, actually, in Web3 is happening something really crazy. And it's like, for example, this idea of Optimism is affecting educational communities. And in Latin America, for example, education is something of the worst paid work jobs. So I think like I would love to see how that can be changed. Like we're experimenting now in Web3, but maybe in the future, like education will be paid really well with like public goods, like support, you
mhm,
know?
yeah,
So basically
yeah,
that.
let's hope for a better future, basically. Um,
Yeah.
awesome, and I would love to learn for you to share us basically a delegate who do you think has received disproportionate delegation compared to the contribution. I think, and the aim of the podcast is actually to increase discoverability for smaller delegates. So I'd love to hear from you as a fresh delegate yourself, who you think has contributed a lot to the collective but hasn't received as much delegation as other more prominent figures in the space.
For me, one group like with less than 0.25% that I would like to highlight is ITU blockchain. This guy is from Turkey. I met one of them in Mexico and we had a great relationship. And for me, they are they are amazing, like their point of views are really neutral and are really optimistic and are really kind. So I like when they write comments in the missions or in the alliances. I don't know. I really like what they do and I think they deserve more delegation. Also, Juxus and Cislatam, I think the work that they do, even when they have a higher delegation amount, I think they still didn't receive as much as they should. Because, for example, the information and the analytics that they present to take decisions is really good and they are always on top of everything. So I think he's another person that should have more delegations.
Yeah, Sidla Tam is doing an amazing work in the governance sphere, and jokes is as well. I've seen other people suggest him to be on the podcast to like increase his delegation. So definitely they're doing something right. And much love to the ITU blockchain guys as well. I've talked to them on discourse, and they're probably gonna be on the podcast sometime.
Yay!
Awesome. And which delegate would you like to see on the podcast as well? Doesn't necessarily have to be the two delegates that you already mentioned, but I'm curious to see which delegate you think or you'd be interested in listening to on the podcast.
I have a long list. Like the first one on my list is Polinia. I think she's super smart and I really admire her. I would like to see Linda Shi too. I think she's amazing and I really like what she did, like giving feedback with leftaries. I really appreciate that delegates with a lot of voting power take the time to read all the missions and give them feedback. Like, like, okay, your budget is really high. I would recommend you to modify it. That was really nice. That they didn't only vote, they participate more actively. I would like to see too Olimpio. I didn't know that he was Latin American or like a Spanish speaker, so I would love to see what he has to say because he's super famous on Twitter and in general in DeFi, he's really well known. And of course, Griff. Like I would like to see Griff bring here. Like I think his perspective will be really interesting here.
Yeah, some amazing suggestions as well. I definitely concur and hope to be able to get, if not all of them, at least most of them on the podcast to talk
I
about.
hope so.
Awesome. And to close on a positive note or an optimistic note, I'd love for you to give a shout out to anybody whose contribution you appreciate and their work that you value in the broader collective. It doesn't necessarily have to be a delegate. It could be a builder. It could be a team. It could be an individual, a company, whatever you feel you want to give a shout out to.
Okay, so I think my first two are Katie Garcia and Gona because they are part of the Grants Council, but they are also are really active delegates. And I really like that they always say what they think, being really respectful, like when you are able to disagree without, how can I say it? When you are able to disagree and you can communicate that in an assertive way, it's amazing for a kind of the kind of communication that we have, like we communicate in writing way, like in messages, so sometimes can misunderstood, but I think they do really well. Like they always say what they think, and I really respect their positions, and I think they are good examples of delegates and grants council participants. Also, I really like, I mentioned Linda Shi and lecturers that give feedback to the missions and take their time to check everyone. And I really like one guy that his name is Chase, I think, from Blockchain USC. Like, I really like his perspective. His perspective and minimal gravital. I like his perspective too. I think their comments in the forum are always really interesting. I really enjoy to read them.
Mhm. Yeah, really on point suggestions. I too love Katie's contributions to governance. I haven't had the chance to interact with Gunnar, but Michael also suggested and shouted out, gave him a shout out. So I'm really hoping to be able to talk with him too. And Lefteris and Linda, of course, really great delegates and members of the collective. Really glad that we have them in the broader ecosystem. Um, Amazing. And lastly, what I would love to do is to let you tell us where somebody could find more about you, like your Twitter, your delegate communication thread, if you have one. And of course, I'll link them in the description, but love to hear from you where somebody could get in touch with you.
Yeah, I think I can send you the link, so it's easier, but you can find more about me in Twitter. I'm really active in Twitter. You can find me in Leinster too. I'm like Brichis.
Mhm.
Brichis, you can find me like that in basically all my social media, in Discord, in Telegram, you can find me like
Awesome.
Brichis. I'm a really accessible person.
All right, I'll have the links in the description for anybody who wants to learn more about you or get in touch. So, and that brings us to the end of the podcast. Bricia, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Really appreciate you having you both here, but also in the governance sphere of Optimism, and really looking forward to seeing more of your contributions in the space.
Thank you for inviting me. I enjoyed this experience. This was great. Thank you.
Absolutely, and thanks everybody for tuning in once again to Delegate Corner.